This is me as a baby with a toy my aunt sent me from Spain. There are objects that mark moments in our lives. When I was 7, it was a yo-yo. I did not realize it had been made thousands of miles away. I also remember my first electronic game. I was about 10 when I got it. I took it everywhere with me. Then, a few years later, I got a Walkman from Japan. Everybody had one. And my first car? It was an American model made in Germany. It gave me so much freedom. I could go anywhere. This object may not mean anything to you. It came from Chile and helped me start my company. It became a family business. This laptop helped us sell all over the world, working from home because a baby was on the way. When I look back on all these objects, these moments, trade was always part of the story. It was evolving as I was growing. Now I see her growing up. What is her future going to look like? How will trade shape her life? Will she pay using blockchain? Will a drone deliver her products? Or will she print them herself? How will technology change the way we trade? How about our Earth? Will trade be greener? This is my story. How about hers? How about theirs?
Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WTO Public Forum. If you cannot hear me, put the phones. There you go. So where are the phones, please? You have it on the desk. And there should be a leaflet telling you which channel to choose for your preferred language. We don't have all of them, but we have a few. Okay? All right. So I'm Roberto Azevêdo, Director General of the WTO. I'm your host today. Thank you all for joining us. And with our theme this year, which is Trade 2030, we're inviting you to raise your eyes from the trade that we have today and look into the future. What will trade look like in 2030? How can we shape this kind of trade to fit our priorities? That's another question. How can we make it more sustainable? How can we make it more inclusive? Are we ready for the changes that lie ahead? Now, these are the issues that we'll be discussing this week. We will all know about much more than we do now. We certainly know that the world is changing. It is happening at an unprecedented rate. New technologies are emerging, environmental risks are growing, and this is challenging the way that we think about trade. If the proper synergies are in place, particularly regarding public policy, so if we have the right public policies in place, by 2030, the technological revolution could help to fuel additional trade, so that's on top of whatever we are expecting today. So with those new technologies, additional trade growth of around 30 percentage points between now and 2030. That is huge, but that is something that is possible if we do the right thing, if we take the right actions. More and more trade will be happening through digital platforms. New ways of delivering products will come on stream. New kinds of services will be created. So we have to ask, is the global trading system that we have today equipped for that new environment. And I believe that the fundamental principles apply, and they are enshrined in the WTO agreements. For example, the importance of clear rules, openness, cooperation, non-discrimination. But the question is this enough? Those basic principles, are they enough? We're seeing new advances making our lives change every day in so many different fields, in AI, artificial intelligence, in green technology, 3D printing, robotics, quantum computing, and blockchain or distributed ledgers. In any system where you have, say, a constitution or a basic text, a founding legal text, if it is not regularly updated, you will see growing gaps between those basic principles that are in the text and the evolution of habits, behaviors, and even ethical values. So more often than not, it is the courts that step in to fill the gaps, creating jurisprudence, for example. But this route, it may be faster, but it does not necessarily reflect the wishes and the priorities of everybody that it affects. So this is a key question. Do we want to leave the task of filling the gaps, filling the blanks to the courts or to unilateral action? Or do we want to sit down and fill the blanks together? The world is changing before our eyes, and although we cannot stop this evolution, so let's give this up. You're not going to stop new technologies, we're not going to stop this evolution, but we can shape it. And in fact, I believe we have to shape it. If we do not, it is inevitable that many will be left behind. It will create new social problems and sources of unease and unrest. For example, there was a recent report from the World Economic Forum which found that by 2025, for the first time in history, machines will perform more work tasks than humans. And they found that technology could wipe out 75 million jobs over the next 4 years. 4 years, 75 million jobs. But at the same time, it could create 133 million new jobs. Now, this is a phenomenal opportunity, but it can only be seized with immediate positive action to reskill workers and support their transition into these new jobs. And that is because the worker that loses his or her job in manufacturing, for example, will not be ready to occupy a position that has opened in a more dynamic sector of the economy. That kind of lesson applies across the board. Technological change could create new problems. It could increase the power of higher firms at the expense of the smaller companies. It could create new inequalities, for example, between digitally advanced economies and those that are lagging behind. Or it could help to build the future that we want to see, helping smaller players and distributing the benefits of trade and economic growth more widely. In fact, this is what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. World leaders came together to set those goals precisely to shape the future and create a better world by 2030. We have a set path towards a better global trade by 2030, trade that is even more sustainable and inclusive, and which is responsive to emerging challenges. And in doing this, in setting this path, I don't think that we can wait until we understand all of the elements of technological change and precisely how they're going to evolve, because this is never going to happen. We can't put progress on hold until we're ready. We have to start talking now. We have to get involved. And that's what we'll be debating here at the public forum. What the future will look like and how we can work together to make sure that it works for everyone. Now, this year's event is bigger than ever. In fact, since 2012, the attendance and the number of events, of sessions, have more than doubled. So that's in just 6 years. Over the next 3 days, we'll welcome over 2,500 attendees and hold 112 events. we actually received applications to host a remarkable 237 events this year. We could only accommodate 112, and the problem is we don't have any more rooms, so we're done. I'm afraid that we cannot add more rooms in the future, but I think we can add more time. So right now, we are considering extending the event to a 4th day. That would allow us to accommodate more requests. So it's great that we're seeing such an overwhelming response. It means that we are on the right track and we are raising the right issues. So I think it's going to be a great week. And to kick off the conversation, we have gathered a truly fantastic panel. I'm very pleased to welcome from another international organization, Erik Solheim, Executive Director of UN Environment and United Nations Under-Secretary General. Erik has an extensive career focusing on environment and development issues, and I'm pleased to say that we're joining forces to find innovative ways to strengthen our economies and the environment at the same time. I'm also pleased to welcome Jack Ma. He dispenses introduction, but I will introduce anyway. Jack is the founder and executive chairman of the Alibaba Group, and surely one of the most remarkable business leaders and visionaries of our time. Jack has been named a Sustainable Development Goal Advocate by the United Nations, and Jack and I have been working closely together in recent years to enrich and inform the growing debate on e-commerce. Next, we have Laura Behrens Wu, the CEO and co-founder of Shippo, which she has built into a leading multi-carrier shipping platform. She is also one of the Forbes 30 under 30. So that's pretty impressive. And we're talking about the future today. I look forward to hearing Laura's perspective as a young business leader. Thank you, Laura. Next, we have another young business leader, Tunde Kehinde, who is the co-founder of Lidya. Lidya is a digital platform designed to help business owners access financing. Tunde is a quite prolific entrepreneur, having also co-founded Africa Courier Express, a last-mile delivery company, and Jumia, an e-commerce platform, both of which are leaders in their field in Nigeria. And finally, we have Christine Bliss, the president of the U.S. Coalition of Services Industries. Christine is well known to many of us as she is a former assistant U.S. Trade representative and trade negotiator, both here in the WTO and for various U.S. free trade agreements. She's a noted expert on trade issues and particularly services. So that's our panel. We're truly privileged to have them here today. This is going to be a truly global debate. We're opening up the conversation to those who couldn't join us today, so who are not in the room. We are webcasting this session, so I should say a special welcome to everyone watching us around the world. When it comes to the moment for the panel to take questions, we will be receiving them from you here in the room and from outside via Twitter or Facebook. In the interest of maximizing the time we have and to allow for more interaction with those viewing online, we would ask those in the room to follow the instructions on the leaflet on your desk if you want to ask questions. It explains how to do that, either through the Slido app or with pen and paper. That's very traditional. If you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, then please pass your questions, the slip, to one of the ushers who will be in the back of the room. And when you submit your question, I would ask you to please specify who you are and where you're from. Once you've sent them in, I will receive your questions here on my tablet. So I will ask as many as I can. I'm sure I won't be able to do everything, but I'll try to cover as much ground as possible. So that's enough for housekeeping. We have, like I said, a fantastic panel. Let's give them a chance to address you. So I'll sit right there. So I'll be moderating and hopefully not speaking too much. I already did my piece. So let me start with Erik, which is another international organization sitting here with us. We are committed, Erik, as you know, to finding ways to ensure that trade and efforts to address environmental problems complement one another. And they can actually have synergies that will lead to a more sustainable future, a better future, particularly for 2030 and beyond. So the question that I would put to you is how do you think, from the environmental perspective, that trade can help here? How can trade be a positive factor?
Start from there?
No, you know, we speak from here. That's my podium. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So fun. How excited I am with this partnership between World Trade Organization and UN Environment, because in the past quite often people saw environment and trade as maybe competing stuff. I see completely differently. This is absolutely integrated, and the more and better we do trade, the better it will be for the environment. Why is that? Well, environment depends on the maximum best resource efficiency. The better we use our resources, the better it's for the environment and for Mother Earth. The better we do trade, of course, the better we use our resources. And also very practical, I mean, look to the enormous success we've had over the last few years. The biggest success of all is the following. Last year, we had more new electricity coming into the global grid from solar alone than from oil and gas, from coal, and from nuclear combined. So could that have happened without trade? No, we know it couldn't. Half of that was China alone. But the Chinese patents may have started in California or in Germany, but the enormous market of China and India took it to such a scale that this is now that coal cannot compete on price with solar can compete with coal on price everywhere in the world. That's a change, and again, it would have been possible without trade. Let me take you to one of my favorites. It's a Swede. His name is Hans Rosling. He just died, but before he died, he wrote a book which is called Factfulness. In that book, he sets out one big question. He asks people all over the world. The last 15 years, has global poverty doubled? Or has global poverty halved? Or is global poverty the same? I guess all of you know the answer. The answer is global poverty has halved. But nearly everyone answered exactly the opposite. When Hans Rosling goes around, nearly everyone believes that global poverty has doubled, while it has halved. And this is absolutely essential, because if we don't celebrate the progress, we won't learn from it and do better. There has been fantastic progress in the world in the last 15 years. Life expectancy is drastically increasing. Global poverty is drastically decreasing. Nearly all children in the world are vaccinated against nearly all diseases. And on the environment, in many areas, we are doing much better than in the past. For instance, protecting the enormous danger of the ozone, the hole in the ozone layer. But the point is, if we know what we did well in the past, we can do more of that in the future. And that is linking trade and environment. And let me give you a challenge. It's time to start fighting. The environment community and the trade community are under pressure and challenged. We need to fight back. And we cannot fight hate with more hate. We can only fight hate with love. We cannot fight ignorance with more ignorance. We can only fight ignorance with facts. And we cannot fight apathy with pessimism, only with optimism. But this package of low optimism of facts will over time carry the day, and will do better both for the environment and for trade, and will do it together. And finally, what's kind of my main message basically everywhere in the world. Let's look for the triple win solutions. All those solutions which are very good for the economy, bringing people out of poverty, creating jobs, do economic growth. At the same time, very good for people, providing better health, uplifting of the individuals, and very good for Mother Earth and for the environment at the same time. And the good news is that we have now any number of these policies, and we should put them front and center in our conversation. It may have been right that at the time of the Industrial Revolution in the United Kingdom, and later in the United States and Europe, and maybe even later than that, that you needed to start having economic growth and then later taking care of the environment. But it's not the case any longer. Just 3 examples at the end. If we move from coal into solar, which we are now doing at high speed at the planet, well, it's creating many more jobs, not fewer jobs. There are 5 times more jobs in the United States of America in solar than in coal. Some politicians speak otherwise, but they're simply ignorant. Adding to that, there are many more jobs for women in the solar industry if we move in that direction. Adding, of course, solar is fantastic for our health. We don't breathe polluted air. We live longer. We avoid any number of deaths coming from pollution. And adding to that, obviously, is very good for our environment if we make the swap from coal into solar. China is in the lead of that swap, but many others are following. Move on to Africa, where nations like Rwanda and Botswana are moving into ecotourism, again, creating any number of jobs in a healthy, good way for people, but protecting nature better. Because if you move into ecotourism, well, you gain more income, which can do better conservation, and then you get more income again. The panda population in China is increasing, the tiger population in India is increasing thanks to this. In Africa, we see like the gorilla population in Rwanda drastically increasing because of this combination of ecotourism with trade and environment. And finally, plastics. Prime Minister India Modi has made maybe the most brave of all promises this year in politics. He said, we in India will phase out one-use plastic by 2022. Think of how big that brave proposal is. But again, yes, for sure it's fantastic for Mother Earth. It will save any number of whales and seabirds and turtles. For sure, it's very good for the health of the Indians because plastic is also carrying any number of diseases when it's spread out in cities. But again, it's also creating any number of jobs because you can then turn into the alternatives. There's any number of jobs to be had in the waste management, in the new technologies which will come. So again, a triple win solution. So I may have spoken too long now, but look into in every area of policy to avoid the ignorance and factlessness of some politicians and move into this triple win future where we set the policies which are fantastic for the environment, fantastic for jobs and the economy, and fantastic for the health and the uplifting of people with the same policies. Thank you.
Well done. Well, that's a very clear vision about a critical issue for humanity, frankly. So thank you for that. We'll go deeper into that. And now we move to the private sector, which for us is very important. This is what the forum is all about. It's about talking to non-governmental institutions, people. And I think, Jack, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Vision and Jack Ma are words that go together. That's your history. Your history was as an English teacher, if I'm not mistaken, meeting in your apartment with a few people, looking at the technology that you had before you. You had a vision about the future and you said, this is doable, let's go. Even though all the odds were against you. Now, 2030, what is your vision for 2030, for trade in 2030? Is it going to be much different from what it is today? And if so, how do we get ready for that? How do we make it the vision that we want for 2030, that you want?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting for this great session. I think I totally agree with Erik's discussion about let's stop fight, let's stop confrontation, the trade and grain. So today, I would say let's stop worry about the future. 1994, I was invited to attend a forum in Beijing discussing about the Internet of the future. About 20 people joined, and everybody was talking about the Internet is going to destroy the society. We should do this to regulate, to control it. So almost 24 years passed. Found out the things we worried never came out. The things we did not worry all over. So you may not have the solutions, but young people have solutions. You don't have the solution today, but we have a solution tomorrow. Have confidence in ourselves and have confidence in the future. Have confidence in the young people. So the trade in, we cannot say when we talk about the future, right? Some people have a vision, but not everybody believing that the things what they want, but we know what the things we don't want, right? So for sure that 2030, the trade will be different, but for sure there will be more trade that time. The IT is to support 20% of the business, but the data technology, DT, support 80% of the business to be successful. 300 years ago, only a few kings, they make benefit from the globalization. 30 years, in the past 30 years, 60,000 big companies who believe in globalization, they benefit from the globalization. Next 30 years, I think 80% of the business, small business, will benefit from e-commerce, will benefit from globalization. So for sure that next 30 years, it is inclusive years for the globalization and trade. E-commerce today, we say, you guys are e-commerce. We're traditional business. Year 2030, more than 85% of the business will be e-commerce. So you like it or you don't like it, you have to be E. 99% of the trade affairs will be online. Only less than 1% of the trade will be the offline. And most of the trade business today we see, yesterday we see all containers. 2030, most of the trade formality is packages, not containers. The business we see today is B2C. Year 2030, business will C2B, consumer to business. Today we see made in China, made in America, made in Switzerland, or made in Geneva. 2030 we see made in internet. So today all the business, I love to be big business. I'm sure in 2030 you want to be small business because you have to be flexible. And 80% of the business at that time are small business, and 80% of small business at that time have to be globalized. If you're not globalized, you're dead. So manufacturing and service industry should be combined together. Manufacturing will not create jobs because most of the jobs on the manufacturing will be created by AI and robots. Service industry is going to be the area that create a lot of jobs. Last century we like to be skill, to be standardization, and this century we need personalization, customization. So all these things will fundamentally change the way we do trade. But for sure that a lot of people, most of the business will benefit from the trade, and we will create much more jobs than we expected. And I think what we are helping, the technology can helping, is enable the small business, every individual, every growth, to reach the market, to reach the money, to reach the logistic, to reach the technology, and reach the training. All these things are happening. Stop fighting. Stop ignorance. Roberto said that we cannot stop technology. The only thing we do is to embrace it. When you are fighting against the technology, when you're fighting this trade revolution, you are fighting among yourselves, and you're losing the future. So the best thing to welcome the future, to be successful in the future, is to embrace it. Change yourself, but don't change the technology. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a very powerful message. I hope people are listening. Laura, now it's your turn. And I hope our trade facilitation agreement is helping your business as well. You're shipping with different carriers, platforms, from your e-commerce store. But Jack just mentioned, I myself mentioned that the future also needs to be more inclusive. It has to be an open door for the smaller players who are now out of the market. They have to benefit from all this. But big companies in general, they have advantages. For example, in the shipping business, they ship in bulk, so they fill containers. And that, of course, is kind of scale, lowers costs, makes them more competitive. So how can the small company, how can small players be competitive in this situation? And you have, I think, a pretty good experience with this.
Really excited to be here. I'll start by telling you a little bit more about my story so that people understand where I'm coming from. So I'm originally from Germany, half German, half Taiwanese. I moved to the US roughly 5 years ago, first to work at a fintech startup. And then at that fintech startup, I was trying to build a business on the side, just like for fun, have a weekend project. And building that side business, I wanted to start an e-commerce store. So there are a bunch of existing technologies out there that you can leverage to start an e-commerce store. I think that's the interesting part today. No e-commerce store needs to start from scratch. You can use existing technologies like Shopify, like Magento, like Alibaba. You can use Stripe, PayPal for payments. You can piece all of these different tools together to start an online store. And that really allows the e-commerce merchant to focus on what they're best at, which is creating a product and creating a really good customer experience. So I was experimenting with that, and I started my online store, and I realized for shipping, it's actually a lot more complicated than I realized before starting that business. Either you have to physically walk to a postal store or to the FedEx, UPS location, or you have to use technologies that are rather like old and outdated, a little clunky. Like most shipping providers aren't tech companies. That's not what they're focused on. So with that in mind and realizing that shipping is a pain point, not just for me, but for every single e-commerce store out there, we decided to build a business on that. And I think that's the other interesting thing. Like there are a bunch of different problems that no individual e-commerce store needs to solve by themselves anymore. Companies are automating that for them. And shipping is a pain point that's across the board for every single e-commerce store out there. So we decided to focus on that shipping problem. And by now we've shipped roughly 70 million packages in the US, but also worldwide. And the learnings from shipping these 70 million packages is really that it's easier than ever to start an online store. So more people are starting online businesses. You don't have to have a physical retail location anymore. Starting an online business is very asset low. You don't need to have any engineers in-house because you're just using the existing technologies. You can piece them together. And then people can really focus on what they're best at, which is making creative and beautiful products, taking care of the customers, building emotional connections with the customers, and being in touch with the trends that are going on out there. And what we've seen is that direct-to-consumer brands are on the rise. So more people are no longer selling through channels, no longer placing their products into a big retail chain. They're selling directly from their warehouse, from their online location to the end customer. And that all needs to be shipped. And it does not only need to be shipped in the country, it also needs to be shipped internationally. The other upside of e-commerce is that e-commerce does not see any geographical boundaries. So when you see an item that you like online, you don't know if it's located in Switzerland, in the US, in China. You just want to click buy and you want to be able to get it to your home. And you're expecting like a turnaround time that is very low. You expect it to be there within a week, not many weeks. You expect transparency along the supply chain. You want tracking to be available. You want returns to be seamless. So all of these customer expectations are really high. And in America, we see roughly 5% of SMBs shipping internationally. On our platform, we're seeing 27% of SMBs shipping internationally. So what I'm saying is people have been talking about we cannot stop technology. I don't want to stop technology. This is amazing. I think people are leveraging technologies to be able to be more creative, to be able to form more human connections, to be able to just make the world a smaller place. And the power is really in the hand of the consumer these days. Consumer expectations are a lot higher, partially, to go back to your question, because retail giants like Amazon have shaped consumer expectations to be free and fast shipping. In America, 2-day shipping, free shipping is standard these days. And at the same time, like SMBs are now able to tap into other technologies that give them access to scale, both in terms of tech resources and also in terms of volume.
All right, that's pretty exciting. Well done. Tunde, you've been trying very hard to make finance available for small companies, particularly in emerging economies, developing countries. And I know it's tough. I know it's tough because in my own work, I have done a lot of research with my team here, and what we found is that financing is one of the top 3 obstacles to export. Big companies, they finance, 80% of global trade is financed somehow. But for the small companies, that finance is not available. There is a huge shortfall of financing. So I wanted to hear from you, how can technology change that? How do we improve the access to financing to small players? Is there a way of turning this around? How can we maximize that? What is your experience there?
Sure. No, thanks for having me. So I guess first I'll start by maybe setting some context so folks understand about our business. So we at Lidya do small business financing within 1 day. So the idea is you apply today, you have money in your account by tomorrow. And the idea came to us because, as was mentioned earlier, so we founded a large e-commerce business called Jumia, and then also another large logistics business called Ace. And we kept seeing the same pattern that all our small business customers would struggle to scale because they lacked consistent access to capital. So I want to buy more inventory, I want to invest in my working capital, I want to build my team, but where do I turn to get that financing? And the reality is most banks around the world struggle to really serve small businesses. And we said, look, there's so much data around these businesses. Why can't we use technology to organize this data and make it easy to make a smart, fast lending decision within 1 day? And that's how Lidya was born. So in the last 1 year, we've now had 100,000 businesses sign up for a Lidya loan. We've raised about $10 million to go after this opportunity. And we're seeing a couple of interesting things. The power of our model is we allow folks not just to get capital within 1 day, but also you're building risk-adjusted pricing and credit scoring tailored to the small business. Because what happens typically is for me to get a loan as a small business customer, I have to provide collateral or audited financials, and most small businesses in frontier markets in particular don't have these things. But when you can use data and technology, not only are you able to get them the capital, you're also able to reward good behavior. So there's now an incentive to say, look, if I am a good actor and I pay my bills on time, I grow my business, not only will I get good pricing, I'll also get a credit score that helps me. And when it comes to trade, it's very practical for a couple of reasons. So we are sector agnostic. We have done now financings in mobile money, in healthcare, in consumer goods. But when you come into international trade and export, there are a few things that our credit helps to do. So one is today, a lot of commodities, particularly from Africa, there's a lot of demand. So everything from cashew to cocoa around the world, but your buyer might want a large volume of goods, and most of our small business customers won't have the capital to meet that demand. Where we come in is to say, look, without having to put up any physical collateral, we're now able to give you the financing you need to actually meet the demands of your off-taker. And when you think about sustainable development goals around, look, job creation, equality, the fact that you can now provide the financing they need to meet those buyers' demand greatly opens up markets for these small businesses that weren't there before. And the second powerful thing is once you've now built credit scoring, which we're building for our customers, typically if you are interacting with a buyer overseas and you say, look, I want to buy X amount of goods, I'm from Nigeria, the first question is, that sounds fantastic, send me the foreign currency. And for most small businesses, unfortunately, they don't have that capital up front to buy cash for these goods. But once you've built a credit score through Lidya, what you can then say is, look, I am AAA on this platform. that allow me to get 30 days, 60 days, 90 days worth of credit from you. And you can imagine the impact that has on a small business. Because now I can bring my goods into a country, I can sell, make some income, and now use that to pay off my debtors. So the power of our model is not just getting capital into the hands of small businesses, but also giving them the credit scoring and pricing that really allows them to open up their markets. And particularly when you think in a frontier markets context where there's such a lack of trust and a perceived high risk, the power of technology and data is being able to bridge these gaps. To say, look, just because you're an African business or you're a business in Latin America or in a business in Asia doesn't make you a bad actor. And what data is going to do is going to bring down these walls and allow, as Laura mentioned, these global supply chains to say, look, maybe I can source the best goods from Africa or from China or from other parts of the world that I was not aware of before. And because of the transparency technology brings, I can do it in a way that doesn't affect my business. And if I step back and think about what really helped us to start this business, I mean, I'm the son of entrepreneurs. My parents used small businesses to put us through school, and I saw how difficult it is in a frontier market where you have lack of access to infrastructure, to power, to finance, and how difficult it is to build your business. And the power of Lidya now is the next generation around the world, doesn't matter where you are, Africa and beyond, you can now say, look, as long as I'm a good actor, and I have data to show I am a good actor, I can have it easier to launch and scale my business. And that's what Lidya is doing, getting credit to small businesses and helping the good actors open the world to their businesses.
Thank you. After that, I'll have a conversation with you about regulations and how they play a part in allowing Lidya and companies like Lidya to act as the kind of financing agency that it has been doing. But we'll get to that down the road. Christine, it's your turn, and you now, with the Coalition of Services, have been working a lot with the service providers who are changing very quickly with technologies, and the new services are appearing out there. So what do you think would be the key trends in technology that will transform services by 2030?
Thank you very much.
I think it's off.
Sorry. Thanks very much for the opportunity to participate in this very distinguished panel. And I want to start my remarks just by saying I'm the head of an association of services companies, but that's a very large umbrella. And one of our missions is to really make services better understood. So if you'll indulge me just a couple of general comments in terms of the services sector. Literally every comment that we've heard today is in some way connected or built on a services activity. From the comments about environment and sustainable development, environmental services, and allowing them to be freely provided across borders is a critical services piece. The discussion of the growth of the internet businesses, the transformation into the online marketplace, fundamental services and software, a mix of both. Laura's comments about the app that she developed and the applications that has on the goods side in e-commerce is very much also built on the provision of services, both in terms of getting product online and delivered, but also the consumer interface on the other end. And then finally, in terms of Kehinde's comments about the apps that he's developed, certainly financing fundamentally is a service, and the way that technology is changing the way that that service is being delivered and making it more inclusive and available. And I make those comments because I think we still have a challenge in educating countries and their populations about the fundamental importance of building a solid foundation of services trade commitments, because services economies in economies across the globe will not grow unless trade and investment enables them to grow in various ways. And the other piece to that, and just a couple of statistics I'll throw out, all of us literally in this room are services suppliers. And in the United States, for example, 8 out of 10 US jobs are service suppliers. 10 million US jobs depend on trade and services and investment. And globally, about half of jobs are services jobs. So tremendously important. And when you talk about the future, a tremendously important part of services jobs. The other very fundamental point is this is not just a services sector issue. Services are integrated into all other economic sectors, particularly manufacturing and agriculture. Historically, from things like insurance to distribution to financing, but with the advent of digital trade, the invention of the internet, the explosion of data flows, software, sophisticated software, and the technology that's growing with that, that element and the transformation of services to digitally enabled services has even compounded the positive impact of services on manufacturing, on agriculture. 25 to 49% of the input of manufacturing is services. And I believe it's the OECD that documented 60% of jobs in the manufacturing sector are actually services related. Now, the data is not, unfortunately, as good as it should be on both the services trade side and on the investment side. And so actually the picture is not as well documented as it should be. But let me bring it back to the conversation today in terms of the future of trade. It was very, very encouraging to see that the World Trade Report that I know the Director General is going to be talking about tomorrow, recognizing the increasing importance of services and technology in really transforming, revolutionizing the structure of trade, certainly by 2030. So when you look at what are the factors that, in my mind, are going to be the biggest elements, a lot of things are already in motion and I think will continue to revolutionize certainly the way that services are delivered and the way they're supporting other sectors in the economy. Certainly the advent of online platforms, the proliferation of online platforms, the advent of software, interactive online software has certainly changed the way that services are delivered and increasingly in sophisticated ways. Smart technology, the combination of technology, often sensors, services, and big data and analytics has absolutely transformed the way that services are delivered, but more importantly, it has caused a greater integration of products and services that are sold together and are also from the production process, from the front end to the back end, services integrated with manufacturing. The same thing is happening in agriculture, where you now have farmers plowing their fields with sensors embedded in the wheels of their tractors so they can test soil quality. We're going to have a panel tomorrow that's going to talk about more generally services in agriculture, where cloud technology can help farmers predict climate so they know when to plant their crops. So that's been a huge impact and will be going forward. The Internet of Things, the bundling of services and goods, the greater reliance on mobile devices. I think that's had a huge, huge impact, especially in certain areas of the world. The Director General mentioned greater reliance on artificial intelligence. I think that's going to be a huge challenge. And the rapid increase in services being delivered remotely. That is certainly going to change the way that rules need to respond to the growth of services and technology. We also mentioned blockchains. Just last couple of points. The collateral effects of this, one, the absolute explosion of data flows. In 2015 alone, the volume of data flows exceeded the flow of goods trade. So a huge challenge we're already facing, will face. The high demand for data storage and data processing. So huge explosion in demand for data storage and data service farms. Also the high demand for and concern for privacy frameworks, where there's a lack of harmony and there's an absolute need for development of frameworks like the APEC private framework and others in terms of needing to meet that challenge. And also the growing importance of SMEs, because predominantly more and more jobs are being created by the creation of SMEs. So that's where the jobs of future are going to come. Lastly, just let me mention some of the potential current dangers we're facing and the risks going forward. The demands for data localization and local processing requirements are a huge problem, and they do threaten to break down the delivery of services in an efficient, cost-effective manner on a cross-border basis. The pressure to impose duties on electronic transmissions is another huge challenge, which, if not handled correctly, could lead to a serious breakdown in cross-border e-commerce. Cybersecurity risks and overreaction by governments is another area that needs to be tackled. Cooperative frameworks need to be developed to handle that carefully. And the limits of services market access commitments are also limiting, and we're pressing up against those, and we need to find ways of going forward. Let me stop there. It's just some trends, some collateral effects, and some of the dangers we're facing.
All right, so I will now turn to a few, struggling with technology here. A few questions that I'm getting from different places of the world, inside the room, and those, there are many coming in, so I will ask you to be concise if you can, but of course not avoiding them. So I have a first one, and I'm not sure that we have an answer for that. It comes from Primitivo Bolaños Reynoso from Colombia. And I think, Jack, maybe you could give us a first look at that. He's asking about the impact of cryptocurrency, whether in trade and in these platforms, cryptocurrency has a role. And he also asks about the multilateral trading system and the WTO legal system. And I would say from our perspective in the WTO, we have a working group that is looking at currencies and exchange rates, but cryptocurrency is not on the radar at this point in time. I'm sure it will come, but at this point it's still very much outside our radar screens. But I don't know whether there in the real world, how cryptocurrency is behaving and affecting things we do.
Yeah. First, I'm not a big fan of the cryptocurrency. I think it has future, but today most of the Bitcoins we're discussing it's just like a fancy story. In the future, it should be in cryptocurrency and should be supported by government and should support it by the good technology. I'm a believer, we are the believer of blockchain technology. The technology behind the encrypted coins, that is the very important. The blockchain technology plus the internet is going to fundamentally change a lot of things, especially the financial sectors. But today, it's just like encrypted currency is most like a 20 years ago internet. It will go on the right track. But when people exaggerate the function of this, let them make some mistakes, let them have setbacks, and then they will come back and then we'll do the right things.
All right.
We made a mistake on e-commerce too. The idea we had 20 years ago about e-commerce is totally different from what we are doing today. So for sure, 20 years later, there were this kind of coins and currency will come out, will be quite different from what we see today.
Yeah, I entirely agree with you that the technology behind the cryptocurrencies is fundamental. And
Yep.
It may help significantly the small and medium enterprises, because with distributed ledger technology, I think we may overcome a lot of these, the lack of trust that the system has on small players. So they will become, with the blockchains, better known by the system, and it will overcome a lot of the obstacles that we have today. I have a question from the room. Maybe Laura, maybe you could handle that, but also Jack, if you want. They're asking, it's Audrey, I said, from Canada. Would e-commerce business reduce the quality of our human relationships? And how can we compensate for the dehumanization here?
Yeah.
Do you have any views on that?
It's a fascinating question. I actually think it's the exact opposite. Like, what we're seeing is that e-commerce stores, especially direct-to-consumer brands, they're directly in touch with the end customer. They're talking to the end customer through social media. Instagram is amazing for direct-to-consumer brands. And it's also a very personal relationship. We see direct-to-consumer brands having a much more direct and personal relationship with the end customer compared to large retail giants before. A lot of these direct-to-consumer brands are selling a lifestyle, an identity. They're selling products made in a certain way, often also made in a sustainable way. They're trying to be very different from the more traditional brands that were out there before. Many times they're also selling a founder story. So it's people can relate to the person making the product. And there is more transparency around where the product is coming from. So that's my take on it, but I'd also be curious about Jack's take.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think e-commerce enriched the relationship between the people. We got almost 300 million people shopping our mobile phone every day. Especially every evening. We got at least 60 million people, most of them women. They spend 3-4 hours on e-commerce without buying anything. They're chatting, right? They're chatting with people. And those, especially I've got a lot of engineers, they don't talk to a lot of people in the daytime, but on the online, they talk hours and hours. And people don't know each other in the next door, but people know each other in the other part of the world.
Yeah.
So it's enriching you, the ability to know more people. E-commerce is so different. Today, the one you think about go and buy, today people on the online, they start to chat, they start to discuss, they start to copy the movie and all the other things before they buy anything. But of course, we got a lot of robots to discuss with them. But anyway, I think this really improving the relationship of the people and they're improving the trust. Can you imagine that you are buying something from Argentina in a village in China? You don't know this guy, you never meet this guy. But you start to wire the money, and that guy, without even receive the money, asking people to deliver, as people he did not know, to deliver the things from countries to countries to your home. It's the trust that we are building. Trade is to build up the trust. This is the most valuable thing in this world. People don't know each other, but they start to trust each other. And this is the good about the trade and the good about the e-commerce.
Thank you, Jack. Tunde, I got a question here about the role for governments and international organizations to support firms like Lidya or even Shippo. So is there a role for governments and international organizations to help you, or is it best to get them out of the way and let you do your thing?
You know, it's a very interesting question. I mean, our sense is to accomplish what we want to accomplish, keep in mind the small business credit gap, small business alone, credit gap around in emerging markets is close to $4 trillion. That's the gap. And what's clear is that even though private sector will play a very big role, we also need the policy support as well. And when you think of an example, you mentioned earlier about regulation, the first words that came to mind was harmony and clarity. Because when you think about emerging markets and a place like Africa where, look, 50 plus countries, different currencies, different languages, for us to take full advantage of the billion plus people, right, it's clear that there needs to be harmony across all these different markets so that folks understand, look, how can goods, services, and people trade and interact across these different borders? And the second point around clarity is what clarity will bring is allowing the private sector to understand how can we play over the long term in a sustainable way. So it's a long-winded way to say, look, we believe there is a role for governments to play in policy that protects the consumer, but at the same time doesn't stifle innovation. So for us, we work hand in hand in different markets. We're operating in 3 countries. We're lending in Nigeria, we have a team in Portugal, we have a team in New York. And to the point around, look, trust and data, it's clear we're unable to do this without policy support and policy clarity. So it is important and it is needed so that we can achieve these goals we want to achieve.
Jack?
Yeah, I'd like to say something for the innovation about regulation. In a government, the only thing they want to do, and they really want to do, is regulate. The thing we worry about is most government officers even never trusted e-commerce, never tried e-commerce, shopping online or shipping things. They start to regulate. So how many ministers have ever tried e-commerce, shipping across the board, borrowing money online? Very few of them. But they are the regulators. And this is something really make us worry. They say, my children are doing that. It's their children know how to regulate. So the other thing I would say is, have you heard about a bill called the Red Flag Bill or Red Flag Act that happened in the 1860s in UK? The UK at that time had automobiles, the cars. So a lot of people who are the horsemen, they hated the cars because they destroyed the jobs of the horsemen. The horsemen at that time were considered to be the white-collar people. So when cars came, they destroyed the jobs. So these guys went to the government and say, please stop the cars. So there is an act called the Red Flag Bill. Every car should have a flag, and no car is allowed to drive over 7 miles per hour. And that stopped the innovation. It's not the regulations that solve the problems. It's innovation that solve the problems. I think all the government officers now should watch cross-hand, watch it with curiosity, and support them, not to stop them. Especially in Europe. I found all the European government, they really love regulations. They worry a lot. They worry about this, worry about that. Listen, worry is opportunity. When people worry about this shipping, we have a company, Laura built. This is solve the shipping problems. When there's a problem, people worry about the financing. We've got a problem from Nigeria, young people, so we created something to solve the problems. If you start to regulate, you're killing everything. And unfortunately, most of regulators, they never use these kind of services. They just say, I worry because my grandfather worry about it, my grandchildren worry about it, my grandfather worry about that. So please, leave some time for innovation, watch it carefully. One of the reasons why Alibaba grows so fast, because the government did not realize, e-commerce grow like that. When they start to realize that, we become very slow. And we got to correct. So that's the way. I'm sorry, just to tell the truth, I want to give opportunity for those young people to solve problems, not regulators to solve the problems. But we have to protect the trade. If there's a trade protectionism, we should protect the trade, protect innovation, protect IP, and protect innovation. This is things we should protect, but not to say, well, I have to protect my rights, my dignity, my power. This is what's happening today.
Thank you, Jack. And I that's very good. And I think that it's sometimes misunderstood. When international organizations like the WTO, I suppose UN Environment as well, step in, governments already did interfere. And often they interfere in the wrong way, as you just said. So what we try to do is make people sit down and discuss good practices. What did work? What are the things that actually make it easier? What are the things that actually enable things? So I see our role as a role of a facilitator of getting the bad actions out of the way. And that, I suppose, is the role that we would like to see international organizations having in this conversation. And your input is extremely important for that. But Erik, you wanted to say something about this? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I fundamentally share Jack Ma's view of the world. The world is much, much, much better than at any other point in human history. Can be measured in any way you want: life expectancy, child mortality, poverty, environment protection, whatever way we measure, the world is at the best place ever, exactly contrary to the view you get through media. I mean, you gave just a snapshot of the Industrial Revolution. Remind yourself, ladies and gentlemen, before the Industrial Revolution, life expectancy on planet Earth was 29. That was how much you could, on average, expect to be. Now it's 71. Young girls in Seoul, South Korea, can now, on average, expect to be 90. Not 1 out of 100, that happened in history also. But on average, South Korean girls can expect to be 90. So there is enormous, enormous, enormous progress, and it's to a large extent related to innovation. And you're right, I mean, there's any number of examples of people who didn't get it. I'll give you one of my favorites. When internet came to my nation, Norway, we had in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was at the time doing peace negotiations, we had what we call internet stations. So place you could go to go into the internet. And there were lots and lots of colleagues who said, oh, this is something very fashionable, but it will go away. There will be no internet in the future. Today, of course, it's a joke. I just looked into the companies of the world. The 8 biggest companies on the planet are all net-based, all tech. All of them are either in the west coast of the United States of America or in China. So it shows also where innovation is happening, or not all of China, southern and central China, and the west coast of the United States, and you have the 8 biggest companies in the world. But we also need regulations. Because there are a number of areas where we cannot do just with innovation, we also need innovation. I mean, a clear example is the enormous plastic scourge, which is now taking over this planet. We need to regulate markets for plastic, while at the same time do the innovation, which will at the end solve the problem. But let me give you one example of an area where business is demanding regulation or ask us for that. I think in Norway we are a very small country, but one thing we have got right in Norway is that when government do regulation, they don't just drop it out like that, but they start a long process with consultation with business as to what will be the effective way of regulating market to achieve your aim. As an example, we in Norway now have the highest penetration of electrical vehicles anywhere in the world. Why was that? Well, there was a conversation as to how can we tweak the market so that we get more electrical vehicles. We have 50% now, much higher. There are more electric vehicles in China, but percent-wise, we are far ahead of anyone else. We changed the tax system so that electrical vehicles come better out in the competition with the others. And we gave some introductory offers, like you are allowed to go in the bus lanes. And through that, market was tweaked and changed. And the market was, in that sense, created by the government, even of course the innovation is coming from Elon Musk in California or from Japanese or Chinese companies producing the electrical vehicles. Another issue which I discussed in California 2 weeks back was how to make the electronic market more recyclable, how to make that a recycling market. Then you need to construct the iPhones and the iPads or anything else in such a way that it fits into a circular economy. Cannot be just at the end use. Because, I mean, an iPad is well designed in California, put together in China, and with components for, I don't know, 30, 40 different nations in the world. It needs to be designed for a circular economy. For that to happen, the tech companies told me, well, then we need to speak to governments. Because governments have any number of policies which are bad for the circular economy, and there are some which are good. We want the governments to put in place more good and fewer bad policies. So why I agree with you, most problems at the end are resolved through innovation. Still, you need regulation of markets to drive the innovation in the right direction.
Okay. I'm frankly swamped with questions. I apologize, we will not be in a position to answer even a third of them or less. So let's quickly try to address a few of them. There's a question here from Sanjita Jain from All India Association of Industries. And that question is pretty broad, so I will put to whoever raises the finger first. So the question is, if technology is going to rule trade in 2030, how do you think that more than 60% of the world, which has no access to technology, can develop? So there's a big digital divide out there. I don't think anybody denies that. From my perspective, just get the ball rolling. I think the answer is to get the other 40% on board. It's not stopping the 60% because they're not going to stop. They're going to continue. They're going to advance. But how do we get the ones that are left behind in the game? I think that is the big challenge. That's what we need to do. And I think I would match that with another question from Juman, from Action Aid. The question is, as we look to the future, what changes are needed to move towards SDG 5, which is gender equality? How do we help women? It is another part, particularly the most vulnerable women in the market. How do we get them on board? So how do we get those that are not connected, that are not playing the digital game, they're not connected? How do we get them on board? And who wants to go first? Christine?
Well, I know there are lots of ideas, and I'm sure there are things that the other panelists are working on very directly, and certainly Jack Ma mentioned very specifically things that Alibaba is doing to get small businesses in particular more online. And certainly from CSI's perspectives, many of our members as well have specific relationships and programs that they're using to try and better integrate small businesses. And one, just by improving the availability of their platforms and getting small businesses ability to reach global markets. And that probably is the most basic way that we're seeing that kind of inclusiveness in occurring very rapidly. Two, many of our companies, as I'm sure others, are involved in looking at innovative ways to try and spread inclusiveness. For example, in Africa, one of the things that one of our member companies is looking at and has looked at is unused spectrum, and they buy it and they make it available in countries for populations to use. Additionally, there are also multiple programs that look at training, because certainly the skill gap, once you create the connectivity, then you also need the training and the skills to take advantage of it. So I would just mention those few areas where greater inclusion. And the last I would mention are electronic payment services, which is another very important way in which the unbanked in countries can become more involved and more included. And so I think that's another area of services that's very important.
Okay. I think Jack and Erik both want to say something, but we're running out of time. So quick, objective answers at this point would be very welcome. Jack.
Yeah, I think internet technology, this technology revolution is made for inclusive. This is a great opportunity for developing countries and underdeveloped countries. Internet is not made for rich countries. Think about this, credit cards, when they're designed, they're only for rich people. Today, the mobile phone payment suddenly cover all of the world. Right? The PC came only go to developed countries. But today, mobile phone, in the rural areas, in the villages, all of that. So this technology revolution comes from the bottom, not from the top. It takes 60 years When electricity was invented, 60 years later, Kenya and Africa started using electricity. But today, within only 2 or 3 years, mobile phone cover all of the world. So this thing, we need a government. We need a government, every government, developing countries, please spend money on the building the infrastructure of internet access. This is the investment they should put in on that, and enable their small business to global buy, global sell, global deliver, global pay, and global travel. This is what we believe the government should take, not to regulate, but to promote. This is what my view is about.
Well, thank you. Erik, very quickly.
No, I mean, Jacques and myself, and I think the rest of the panel is basically singing from the same notebook. What's surprising to me is not that there is a digital divide, but exactly the opposite. How fast the most marginalized and the poorest people in the world are picking up the new technologies. It seems that we have maybe 1 billion extreme poor on the planet. A mobile phone is among the first you buy. As soon as you have something to fill in your stomach, the next you do is to buy a mobile phone. I'm traveling all over Africa. You come no place, even in the poorest of places, the people, young people, don't have a cellular phone. It may not be the most advanced, may not be able to do everything, but they have it. So it's the first item people are buying. So it shows an enormous democratization of the world. And if I may add on the gender perspective, at least in Northern Europe, girls are now doing better than boys in every topic in school. Absolutely everything. In my nation, Norway, when I was a child, we were told that girls they can do English language, maybe history, but they cannot do physics or chemistry, or not for sure not mathematics. Well, now girls are doing better at every level, from kindergarten to postgraduate. At every level in every subject, girls are on average doing better than boys, and in all the hard issues, the technology issues, and maths. There is only one area where we males still are doing better. That's your favorite occupation in Brazil, soccer.
Let's not talk about soccer for the moment.
Can I add one more about the women? I think this is the difference between 21st century and last century, 20th century, 19th century is about last century we compete on muscles. This century we compete on wisdom and user experience. One of the secret sauce for Alibaba's success is that we have 49% of the employees are women. 30% of senior management are women. They care. If the computers are very cold, but you have to feel the warmth behind the computers. That is the women. That is the people. Women care others more than men care themselves more. Women care of the husband and parents and the kids. So when you know how to care in this century, you have the winning opportunities. And by the way, let me tell you, the power sellers, most of them are success people are women. So this is the great opportunity for women, and if you want to make the world better, women should take more jobs and leaderships on that.
All right, I'm trying to get the questions we got many different questions here, some about the WTO, and I just apologize for everybody that sent questions. I cannot have time to cover all of them. I would try to stick to some questions which address the issue of the debate more closely. For example, there is a question here from Daniel Pfeffer of ICC Brazil. He's asking, how can technology help build trust among people and nations? And that goes back to a question I asked you, Tunde, like blockchains. Is that something that could revolutionize financing for small and medium enterprises? There is this know your customer, very important and legitimate policy now in place. And do new technologies help the small players to be better known and to build trust in them? And anything else you want to say? Another question that I'm sorry, I can't find it now. So can artificial intelligence draft regulations instead of us, basically? So anything you can tell us in that perspective would be helpful.
I mean, what's clear if you think of including the rest of the world, right? And if we go with the approach, let's say, for example, we want to build the bank of the future, it's clear that if you attempt to put a physical bank branch or a physical retail store in every single location around the world where folks are excluded, it will take another 100 years. And it's time that we don't have. So what's clear is that technology is going to continuously bridge the gap towards financial inclusion, literacy, etc. And the beauty of what we're doing is because we lend just using data, essentially you're doing it without bias. So what that means is it doesn't matter if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're old, if you're young. Essentially, as long as you show you're a good actor in the system, you're able to get access to financial services that can materially change your life, right? And so to the points that I made earlier around, look, what role will technology play, it's clear that it will ease access to financial services, it will ease access to trade, it will open up markets, and it'll do it in a way that's 10 times, potentially 100 times faster than what we've seen in the last century. And to the point around blockchain and around trust, for us, if you think about what that materially means in terms of connecting a buyer and a seller. So essentially what you're able to say is, look, the goods that are going to a particular destination can be trusted. And so in terms of the speed, in terms of releasing documents, payment of services, that will materially move faster than what the options are today. So one, it'll reduce bias in lending and access to services. It'll open up markets, and it'll shrink the time it takes to financially include the rest of the world.
One question here, and Erik, I will ask you, but again, I remind we're running out of time, so as briefly as possible, because this is a big question. The impacts of climate change, especially on small island developing states, like the Caribbean, for example. We know that pretty much almost every year something is going to happen, a hurricane, and in other places of the world, tsunamis and things. So the impact is coming. How can we use technology and to support the efforts of these catastrophes that are pretty much predictable? We know they're coming. How can we help with new technologies? How can trade even support the efforts to mitigate the impact of these catastrophes in these countries?
Here there are two forces working at the same time. One is Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is angry, that's for sure. Mother Earth thinks we have misbehaved, and she's reacting back with, as you said, hurricanes, sea level rise, extreme storms. We will see a lot more and worse weather events in the future. But there is a counterforce, and that's of course that humans are much better organized, states are stronger, civil society are better linked, and technology can be used. So while, yes, we will see more and worse storms, we also have a society which is better prepared for it. I mean, let me take you one place I visited which illustrates, and that's in Bangladesh, but it's very much the same as in the small island development states. A place called Kukri in southern Bangladesh, among the most vulnerable communities on the earth when it comes to climate change. In the past, if there was a big storm, the community would be completely wiped out. But now, they have any number of protection measures. They have built the houses on pillars so that the storm can come under. They have even made sure that the cattle can be taken to these places because, I mean, if you're a very poor man, the 2 calves you have is critical for your future. You will try to protect it. They have warning systems on mobile phones because even if people are poor, they all have a mobile phone. This warning system will immediately turn in and override the rest of the information on the mobile phone. Because people may also have TV and exactly the same. So society is and state is much better prepared. In the 1970s, there was a cyclone in Bangladesh killing 500,000 people. Probably the biggest natural catastrophe in modern times anywhere in the world. If something similar happened today, it will be bad. Maybe there will be deaths in the hundreds, maybe even in the thousands, but nothing even similar to the 1970s. And that applies also for most small island development states. Yes, Mother Earth is very angry and will hit hard back because we misbehave, but also society is better prepared, so and stepping up. So let's do both, better on both, prepare ourselves for climate events, but also reduce the emissions so that we see less of it.
Well, thank you. A question here from Bloomberg. Will there be a functioning WTO in 2030? So I'll start answering absolutely yes, undoubtedly. But having said that, I don't know, Christine, maybe? Yeah.
Well, certainly from a services perspective, and I use that in the broadest possible term to cover services, digitally enabled services, I think it is critical that we continue to have an even stronger and functioning WTO multilateral rule system. It was really the negotiation of the GATS back in the early 90s that laid the foundation for the growth of an explosion of services, trade, services, and investment. So I think it is critical. So it is equally critical that we now engage in the exercise of looking at what reforms, what updating may need to be done, and certainly the ongoing discussions and eventual launch of e-commerce negotiations are hugely important. And having binding, effective dispute settlement is a very important part of that. And the last piece of what I just wanted to say is that your question about inclusiveness really goes to the importance of the WTO, and that is that if we want to increase connectivity and the availability of the internet, as Jack Ma says, building infrastructure is critical. The government and regulators clearly are going to have a role, but the question is, what can we do to prevent balkanization of the internet? What can we do to prevent nations from exerting sovereignty over the net? And what can we do? Because that infrastructure, unless there is accompanying free flow of data on a cross-border basis, unless there are disciplines that don't allow imposition of duties on e-commerce so that it's choked, if electronic transmission of data is not choked through search for revenue, that is going to be a real problem. So we must face those challenges. And I think if we do, and I think we can through, as you say, endless creativity, especially with all the innovators on this stage and elsewhere, I think it's a challenge we can meet.
Thank you. There's another question here from Tianze Zhang. Doesn't say where he is. And this is to Jack. It is Mr. Jack Ma. How do you assess the impact to China of a trade war which initiated by America? Should the world still be hopeful? Don't put me in trouble here, Jack. Just.
Well, I think that it's easy to launch a war, but it's difficult to stop the war. This thing, if it goes, it's going to hurt everybody. I think the next 30 years, the world is facing huge challenge about this technology revolution. I think the US and China should work together to solve this challenge, to create more jobs, to kill the poverty, using technology to solve the disease and the environment instead of this kind of wars. It's going to destroy not only China, US trade, it's going to destroy lots of other countries' small business. It's no good for everybody. I think in 21st century, we should have the solution to solving the problems by not confronting each other. So I feel as a business person, business community, we don't like this. Just like parents normally, they fight, say, we fight for kids. The kids said, we don't want you to fight. We have our ways to solve. So I think this thing may last for 20 years, unfortunately. So we are hopeful, We think using the technology, using the internet, supporting the small business, using innovation ways, there is a way out. Trade deficit or trade surplus is no longer being an issue. USA grow almost to 4% of the GDP, even if they have such large trade deficit. But I think in the next 20 years, if you ask me 2030, the thing we want to see and the thing will not happen, that trade deficit talk is last century's talk, industrial period. It's about the trade quality. It's not about the trade deficit. People love the trade improving jobs, right? When trade stops, sometimes the war starts. So trade is the way to stop wars. Trade is the way to build up trust. Trade is not the weapon to fight against each other. There will be a better way to make a fair trade. So this is my view, and I'm a very hopeful. I think government, people today, they are smart. They have the wisdom. And people like us, business people, should always try to build up the trust between different countries, cultures. So I think we should be hopeful. It's no longer, this thing, when it starts, is going to be difficult to stop. So let us try to solve the problem, and business community should stand out and say, we don't need a war, we need business. That's my view.
Well, thank you. There is, I got an information that room W, those of you who know the WTO, is another very big room that we have in the main building, is packed of people who couldn't find room here and are watching the webcast from room W. So I just wanted to say thank you for them and apologizing that they're not physically here with us. I don't think we can increase the room for next year, but we'll do our best to accommodate people with one more day. Maybe Laura, maybe you could field this question. This is from Democracy Matters in the UK. It's a broad question, but it's, I think, something related to you. They are asking, what trade rules do we need to create now to bring about the future that people want in 2030? So from your perspective, is there anything that needs to be done at this point?
Technologist and a business person. I don't make any public laws. But what we're seeing is, like, we're especially looking at e-commerce and cross-border e-commerce. Cross-border e-commerce is still a little complicated, or actually quite complicated for SMBs. They're looking at duties and taxes that they need to figure out. International shipping is something that's hard. And especially on the duties and taxes side, I think there's a lot that people can do to simplify that, to put some standards into place that allow SMBs to be able to tackle that in a efficient and easy way. So that's from the duties and taxes side. I would say, independent of trade regulations, another thing that governments could provide that I am very excited about is, when I've been out of school a while now, but when I was in school, software development was not something that was taught in class, and that's actually something I'm quite worried about. I'm worried that people look at their smartphones, look at platforms that, like Alibaba, like other platforms out there, and think it's magic. It's not magic. Anyone can create platforms like that. Anyone can build software. Anyone can build applications. So for me, where I stand in terms of trade, I would like to have it start at the educational level in primary school as early as possible, to be able to get our next generation successful and fully involved in building software for that.
Well, thank you very much. There is another question here, and they're asking, the question is from Melissa, Canada, asking entrepreneurs basically, I suppose. Regulation is usually 3 steps behind the innovation. That's the point Jack was making just a moment ago. How can we make regulation faster and more relevant? My view particularly is talking to these people. They know what needs to be done. They're the ones on the ground. They're the ones who experience the obstacles and the difficulties of doing business. Talk to them more often. And so getting the opportunity that you're here, what are the things that need to be done to make regulations faster and more relevant?
No, the point you made is spot on, right? I mean, one thing that we attempt to do is to be very proactive with regulators. I think oftentimes as entrepreneurs, sometimes you can be scared of the regulator and say, look, if I sit in my little corner of the world and hope no one notices me, I can grow without any issues. But what's clear in today's world is for you to hit the scale that you want to hit, and to the point that Jack made earlier, that the world is collapsing, right? And it's now really a global supply chain where not just are your physical goods coming from around the world, but also your talents coming from around the world as well. And for you to be able to take full advantage of the opportunity to say, look, I want to hire the best talent from every single part of the world, you have to engage with the regulator. So for us, what we do is really go in a very proactive stance to say, look, here's what we're trying to build. Here's the benefits for you, which is job creation, which is access to capital for entrepreneurs. And here's how we can all win. Because one thing I find is that folks in government, look, they care about job creation, they care about taxes, and they care about protecting the customer, amongst other things. And so where we come in to say, look, because of the way we operate, naturally, we are going to create more jobs because we're getting capital to small businesses. Naturally, we are going to allow for financial inclusion because we're allowing for women, for minorities, for folks who are not in urban centers, who are in rural parts of the world, to get access to financing. I mean, the example I'll give is, of all the thousands of loans we've done, we've physically visited maybe 10 of our borrowers. And so you can imagine what that means in terms of getting access to people around the world. So we like to sit at the table, because if you're not at the table, the challenge you have is that regulation is being made without your voice. And that regulation can be very disruptive and it's tough to unwind. So for us, where we play a role is, look, we're at the table, here's what we intend to do, and we pound on that table for those entrepreneurs, those small businesses, so that they can realize their dream of creating sustainable businesses.
I entirely agree with that. But Jack, there's another one here. You're popular with the questions. Research, this is from Development Alternatives for Women in a New Area. So to you, and if Laura and Tunde want to pitch in, research indicates that the high commission rates charged by online platforms are a major impediment for small and medium enterprises. How can we overcome that?
Well, I don't know about what do you mean about the high commission. For a platform like us, we charge 1.7, 1.5% of the transactions you finished, compared to the traditional business that the money for cross-border trade or whatever trade, at least like a 15 to 17%. And I think the bigger we are, the bigger the platform, the more data we have, the service, the cost of technology will lower, the rating is going down. So this is what we are doing. Actually, our charging rating is getting lower when our platform is getting bigger. So in the future, the conference is not about this. It's conference about a platform is doing a lot of things that a government is supposed to do. So the problem between government and platform is going to be in trouble. So this is something that I don't know how to deal with that, because I understand government said this is supposed something that I should do, but actually they did not do it well. We are doing that. So I don't feel that the commission for small business on the platform is getting higher or more important. On the other side, actually, we think the small business, if you want to deliver, if you want the payment, if you want all the cloud computing, do things yourself. It's much more expensive. You have no chance to compete with big companies. But using platform, you are using the most cost-effective technology that can compete with anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Yeah, I completely agree. Platforms are providing services to e-commerce stores, small and mid-sized, that they don't have to develop in-house anymore. So that means they don't need to have big software development teams to figure out how to build a payment gateway, how to build a storefront. They can just piece together existing technologies. And a lot of these existing technologies these days their pricing structure is made for SMBs. Like, there are no upfront installation costs. You can, like, in this example, it's a pay-as-you-go, or you only get charged when you're making a sell. And these kinds of structures are very favorable for small and mid-sized businesses that are just getting started, that are trying to grow their businesses as well. So I think the other part to point out, though, we've been talking about trust a lot. I think trust also gets created through the names of these kinds of platforms. Like, you buy on Alibaba, or you buy using PayPal, and you know when something goes wrong, you have someone to talk to mediate. It's not going to be, someone is going to help you out, you're going to be heard.
Yeah, by the way, I want to say I'm not speaking for platform. People say, Alibaba, Jack Ma, you are CEO of a platform. No, I'm a retired chairman now. I speak as a teacher. As a person been working on e-commerce for 23 years, I want to share with you that for a small business, if you want to sell things across the board, deliver 72 hours everywhere in the world, 24 hours domestically, without using a platform, it's impossible. But this is how the first technology revolution had a format called factory. The second technology have a business format called company. Now the third technology will create a platform. And platform is going to coordination between government and company, private and private. So it's very complicated. Please do not worry about the commission. The commission will low down because of the market effect.
Thank you. Erik, I have one for you. It's from Aline Bayat from the International University in Geneva. The question is, would increasing pollution from the international transport sector linked to a growing trade and e-commerce threaten the gains?
I am an eternal optimist. I believe we are on the verge of doing exactly the opposite. We can drastically reduce, and we can have, of course, have more transport with drastically reduced pollution. But the obvious area is electrical vehicles. I mean, we will soon see electrical vehicles. I mean, it's just a matter of time. Everyone knows that the future of city transport is electric. It may be in the next 2 or 3 years. It may take 10 years. That's to some extent depending on where the governments are driving this market. In India, as an example, I mean, the government of India is now the first buyer of electrical vehicles in India. Many of the states of India, I mean, Maharashtra, Telangana as examples, and now the governments are putting electrical vehicles out to create infrastructure for the rest. So we see a very, very fast, I think, movement into electrical vehicles. If you look to the more global picture, shipping is also, we also see a gradual reduced pollution from shipping. And from air traffic, it's maybe not as immediate, but also in air traffic, it's not long before we will see electrical flights. The airport authority of my nation has just declared that in 10 years' time, we will have normal scheduled electrical flights in my nation. And all the big companies are working on this. So yes, indeed, I think we'll see a future with more trade, more transport, but with much less emissions. And that, of course, what we need to drive by innovation, by government regulation, and any other ways. And there's so much we can do. So let's not be pessimistic.
Well, thank you, Erik. And my clock is ticking down. Our time is up. So I still have a few questions here, actually many, that I couldn't cover. I apologize for those who sent their questions, but I thank them effusively for participating in some way or another. The questions themselves will be food for thought for our future proceedings. I know that all of you have places to be in a few minutes, so I'm not going to hold you back. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank those who are watching us on webcast, and I want you to please show some appreciation to these people who are here today with us, sharing very, very, very important insights, and with a round of applause. Thank you all very much.